When this small group of people asked Jesus, should we pay taxes to the emperor? They're asking him a political question, and a question a lot of people in first century Israel were asking, because first century Israel was a political society which had been invaded, occupied, and subjugated by another political society, the Roman Empire, which politically oppressed Israel through the agencies of a Roman governor, an army of Roman soldiers, and a network of Jewish collaborators, the tax collectors, who on behalf of the Roman government strong-armed and exploited their fellow countrymen because they found you could make a good living by collaborating with the oppressor. So when this group of people asked Jesus, should we pay taxes to the emperor? They're asking him, Jesus, should we be subsidizing the oppression of our own people? But it's also a religious question, because first century Israel was a religious society which had been invaded, occupied, and subjugated by another religious society, the Roman Empire, whose state religion was pagan polytheism, and which secured its political unity in part through the agency of idol worship. And one of the idols the Romans worshipped was the emperor. And just in case anybody forgot that, the Romans circulated reminders of that. Every coin the Romans minted was stamped with the image of the emperor. And around his image on that coin were inscribed the words, Tiberius Caesar, Son of God. So when this group of people asked Jesus, should we pay taxes to the emperor? They're asking him, Jesus, should we be participating in pagan idolatry? The political question turns out to be a religious question. But the religious question remains a political question. Politics and religion, they're all mixed up here. But the two things inevitably get mixed up. When we talk about how shall we order our society, we are talking about how shall we order the relationships in our society between people and between groups of people. To what are people entitled, and what do people owe each other, and what is just? Those are political questions. But for religious people, those are religious questions. Those are questions to which our religion speaks. Our religion very seldom, if ever, prescribes any specific public policy, because our scriptures aren't written in the dialect of a democratic republic. But what is just? What is unjust? These are questions that Martin Luther King Jr., for example, asked, and he got his answers from his religion. If you would ask Dr. King to keep his religion out of his politics, you would have been neutering his politics. And if you'd asked him to keep politics out of his religion, you would have been asking him to renounce his religion. He was a Baptist. And you know those Baptists, they read their Bibles religiously. And those Bibles of theirs are full of teachings about justice. For religious people who take their religion seriously, political questions are going to be religious questions at one level or another. And I think we all know that religion and politics, when they get all mixed up together, sometimes bring out the worst in each other and the worst in us. Regardless of which side of the aisle you sit on, you can see it clearly enough in the party on the other side of the aisle. And we can see it in this morning's gospel. That small group of people asking Jesus the question is a coalition of two parties, the Pharisees and the Herodians. And who are they? The Pharisees were a religious party in first century Israel who despised Roman paganism and despised tax collectors. The Herodians were a political party in Israel, which had no particular interest in anybody's religion, but whose platform was collaboration. The Herodians politically partnered with the Romans, and they profited from that partnership politically, socially, and economically. If the tax collectors in first century Israel had ever been given a vote, they all would have voted Herodian. So there's your coalition, the Pharisees and the tax collectors. You could not find two parties that have less in common. They not only have two different agendas, they have two opposite agendas. And they each probably would have answered the question they asked Jesus very differently. The one thing that two parties have in common is that Jesus threatens them both. The Herodians see that Jesus threatens their happy relationship with the oppressor. The Pharisees see that Jesus threatens their religious authority. They both see their interests would be so well served if they could just get rid of that rabbi. And they both see that getting rid of that rabbi is going to be extremely difficult. Because it's hard to get rid of that rabbi without offending the constituency that adores him. All those crowds of followers whom neither party can afford to alienate. This is a political problem. What's the solution? Alienate the crowds from Jesus by asking Jesus in front of the crowds, should we pay taxes to the emperor? If Jesus says, yes, do your duty, pay your taxes to the emperor, the crowds who are following him are going to abandon him because they believe he's the Messiah, which is to say they believe he is their king, which is to say they believe he has come to overthrow the Romans. And if they hear that Messiah say, yeah, pay the emperor, he's going to sound to them like a collaborator. And they're going to reject him. But if, on the other hand, Jesus says, no, do not pay taxes to the emperor, then that coalition will have all the testimony they need to report him to the Romans, who will no doubt arrest him as an insurrectionist and probably execute him as a political revolutionary. Do you see the trap? It's a really clever trap. And Jesus gives a really clever answer. Show me the coin with which you pay your taxes, he says. And when they produce the coin, he says, whose image is on that coin? Caesar's, they say. Well then, Jesus says, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, give to God what belongs to God. Is that a religious answer? Is that a political answer? I think it functions first as a political answer in that it impresses the crowds, it divides the coalition, and it allows Jesus to step right out of their trap. But if we think that Jesus is just trying to be clever or just trying to get out of a trap, we are missing the real substance of his answer. What do we give Caesar? Whatever belongs to Caesar. What belongs to Caesar? Whatever bears his image. What do we give to God? Whatever belongs to God. What belongs to God? Whatever bears his image. You don't find a coin like that by looking in your pocket. You find that coin by looking in a mirror. You were made in the image of God. So you belong to God. So give yourself to God. That answer probably meant little or nothing to the Herodians, because the Herodians cared little or nothing about God. But that answer probably stung the Pharisees, because they cared everything about God. But that deep, sincere interest of theirs in God had become partnered with their compelling interest in defending and preserving their authority over religion in Israel, which, if you think about it, is a political agenda. In the dirty sense of the word, political. In the sense that it's really just about who wins, who gets the upper hand, who gets the power and the privilege to do what they want to do and to do what they want to do to their enemies. The politics of Tiberius Caesar, the politics of Pontius Pilate, the politics of the Herodians. Somehow, that got inside the Pharisees, who never thought of themselves as political. I mean, they could see that stuff in the Herodians. They could see that stuff in the party on the other side of the aisle. But they couldn't see it in themselves. So Jesus told them to go look in the mirror. I'm honing in on the politics in this story because we live in a political society. This is an election year, and politics, I believe, is a legitimate field of interest for Christians because justice and injustice are of interest to Christians. It's in the Bible. And it's related to stewardship. Politics, in part, is about stewardship. In part, politics is about deciding how we shall spend or how we shall save a society's resources. So, at some level, for religious people, that becomes a religious question. At the personal level, for a Christian, stewardship is about remembering that everything I have belongs to God. And I am to spend everything I have on what matters to God. So then it seems appropriate to me that I will spend some of what I have on politics. Some of my time, some of my talent, some of my brains, such as they are, some of my breath. Because politics does comprehend some things that are of compelling interest to God. Which party best serves those interests? Or which of those interests are best served by which party? Or which issues are of greatest urgency? Or which public policies best meet the demands of justice? Those are questions over which people of good faith will honestly disagree and argue. In a society increasingly polarized, where goodwill is a resource in desperately short supply, it is hard to find a conversation partner with whom you can enjoy a good, honest, constructive argument. But this is how we give Caesar what belongs to Caesar. This is how we give the society in which we live what we owe it. This is how we do justice to our country. Not just by paying our taxes, but by engaging in honest argument and conscientiously casting our votes. Regardless of how we cast our votes, we're probably all going to walk away from the voting booth feeling like we've had to compromise something at least a little bit. That's just the nature of the beast. In a fallen world, the demands of justice are never going to be any more than imperfectly met. So we're always going to be arguing over the lesser of two evils, or which is the greater of two goods. The difference between red and blue is seldom black and white. And believers of goodwill are going to find themselves sitting on opposite sides of the aisle. I don't see the problem with that. We see a problem emerge when our political affiliations and our religious identities become so closely partnered that they become synonymous. And what happens to us then is what happened to the Pharisees. Our political agendas invade, occupy, and subjugate our religious identities. Our religion becomes what religion became in the days of Amos: hateful. And we end up compromising something that ought brook no compromise. Our fundamental identities as followers of Jesus, who commands his followers to love their enemies. Okay. How we square that command with the demands of justice, that is a fraught question. But God's answer to that question is unequivocal. God's answer to that question is the cross of Jesus Christ. And that is the identity that ought to transcend our every other loyalty. I think the Herodians were right about one thing. I think it's possible that Jesus does pose a threat to some of our profitable partnerships and probably some of our politics. The first question of stewardship is not, to whom does everything I have belong? The first question of stewardship is, to whom do I belong? Is that a religious question? Is it a political question? Is it an economic question? Yes. And every Sunday we act out an answer to that question. Every Sunday, everybody on both sides of the aisle abandon their sides of the aisle. And left and right together, we all get into the aisle, we all go to the altar, and we all return those precious coins, each of them stamped with the image of our Maker, to the one to whom we all belong.